No,
I
and
think
I
that,
always tell Scott
yeah,
that whenever you're in the live chat, you always have to watch out because they fling poo like
they
nobody's
do.
business.
They do.
Hey,
Of course, we're gonna throw poo at them.
welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. It's episode 42. We're in season 3 still. I am Josh Hayes here with Scott Moon. Our guests tonight are David Bruns and Chris Pourteau. They're the co-authors, collaborators of the new SynCorp Saga. The Lazarus Protocol is out now, and the second book is up for pre-order, Cassandra's War. We're going to talk a little about that later. It's Monday night. It's September 24th, and man, it's been a crazy busy week and a ridiculously busy weekend. Thank you guys for joining us here on Monday night.
Hey, thanks for having us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think you guys we kind of went back and forth on our availability for a little bit, but finally, it's always interesting trying to schedule multiple guests and trying
Like
to
herding
work
cats.
around work schedules. The funnest thing is trying to do like when we were trying to figure out a specific day that we're going to broadcast. We're like, are we going to do it Monday? Or we're going to do it Thursday? And people are like, I can't do Thursday. I can't do Monday. I can't do mornings. I can't do evenings. And then finally we were like, whatever, we're doing it Monday night. If you can't be there, you can't be there. But it's great when we have a big panel and a lot of people to talk with, especially when it's two collaborators, which Scott and I feel real passionate about collaborating.
Collaboration rocks most of the time.
We love talking about it, but we also like to learn how you guys do things and how you guys approach projects.
We get a lot of questions about that. A lot of people ask, well, how do you collaborate? What are, so people are very interested in that topic, I think.
And the answer is very carefully.
Yes, we have a
carefully.
nice story we can tell you about that topic.
Yes.
We're gonna get all into that.
I have a feeling we're going to go long on this episode because once we start talking about that, we go off on tangents. But Chris, you've been on the show before. David has not. If you don't mind, David, I'm going to put you in the hot seat and let you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about how you got started in writing.
Sure. My name's David Bruns. I currently live in Minnesota. I was a Navy guy once upon a time, and then I did about 20 years in the corporate trenches until one day I decided I was not going to be in the corporate trenches anymore, and I walked away from it and decided I was going to be a full-time writer. So there's a lot of stuff in there, but I left the job suddenly, came home, and I had a job at the time where I travel literally every week. And I came home, and I had a job like this for several years. I came home and I said to my wife, this was April, I said, you know what? I am not going to even look for a job until after the summer. I'm taking the summer off. And she looks at me, she says, man, you better find something to do because you're going to drive me crazy. So she was the one who suggested that, hey, you've always said you're going to write a book. Why don't you write that book? It's a great idea. So on Monday morning, I sat down on my desk and I said, okay, let's write that great American novel. About 3 months later, I produced a very bad first novel. But I also decided this is what I wanted to do. So I kept doing it. I produced a sci-fi fantasy series. My first series was called The Dream Guild Chronicles. It was like 2014 into 15. I was looking for a new project after that and ran into an old Navy friend. And he really wanted to write a military thriller and didn't know how to do it. And I was looking for a new project. He had an idea. He was a 21-year career intel veteran. And really had this great idea about Saddam Hussein's nukes. So Weapons of Mass Deception was produced about a year later. So in 2015, we collaborated on a second one in 2016. The third one we actually sold to St. Martin's Press. It'll come out next year. It's called Rules of Engagement. It's about North Korean cyber hackers. So I'm now officially a hybrid author. In between that, I did a lot of short science fiction, and that's how I met Chris actually in maybe 2015, 16, Chris?
Something like that, yeah. It was
so, Chris was putting together an anthology and invited me to be part of it, and we got to be friends, and he started talking to me about this passion project that he had for years. I don't even know if it was called the SynCorp Saga at that point, but it was this sort of multi-book series about. I think the best way to describe it is it's a cross between The Godfather and The Expanse. So it's like The Godfather in space.
Nice.
We talked about it back and forth for a couple of years, and then almost a year ago, actually to the day, I started writing the first in the series, which is the one which is out now, Lazarus Protocol, and we banked a couple of books before we released. So the second one comes out the beginning of October, and the third one, which is in editing at the moment, comes out at the beginning of November. So it's projected to be a 9-book series. Chris is picking up with book 4. And that's how I got to where I am now.
That's brought him to be the man he is today.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple of follow-up questions.
Sure.
The first
Already.
one is, yeah.
He's like
Cross-examination.
making notes.
Hey, you know what? I'll make more notes. I'll let Chris introduce himself and talk about him, because I'll once we get into this, I'm sure we'll get into the weeds of it. So, Chris, before I don't let you introduce yourself, why don't you go?
All right, so my name is Chris Pourteau. I've been indie publishing for about 5 years now. I got into it because I read 3 books. I read Breakers by Ed Robertson. I read Old Man in the Wasteland by Nick Cole, and I read Roberto Calas's first book in his Zombies in Medieval England series. And damn it, it's escaped me at the moment. But those 3, the reason I say those 3 books, I initially saw indie publishing as an electronic version of Vanity Press, and I didn't really want to have anything to do with it, because I just didn't want to have anything to do with Vanity Presses. And I read those 3 books, and I was like, oh, wow, people write this stuff and publish it themselves, and it can actually be good. So I decided to get into it myself. I published my first novel, Shadows Burned In, which is sort of a semi-near-future sci-fi horror kind of mishmash, in 2013. And then I wrote a series of novellas set in Michael Bunker's Pennsylvania universe. The first of those was called Gettysburg. And that's when I met David, actually. He wrote a short story called The Yesterday Adjustment, which the title alone sold me on the story, because it was so Star Trek, and I'm a big Star Trek fan.
Right.
It's a time travel short story set in the same universe, and I read that, and I was like, oh, this guy's really, really good. And so David and I developed a friendship, and I sort of beta read his Weapons of Mass Deception and Jihadi Apprentice, the second book in his Middle Eastern political thriller series. And we sort of, I invited him to a couple of anthologies that I proctored, and we got to know each other. And so I wrote a book that's still on the shelf at the moment called ORP, which stands for Optional Retirement Plan. And it was inspired by Bruce Springsteen's Murder Incorporated. I don't know if you know the song, but essentially the song is about this over-the-hill assassin slash enforcer who is sort of outmoded with his weapons and his techniques, and now he becomes the target for assassins. That's kind of what the story is about. So I took that baseline idea, threw it 150 years in the future, and gave my over the hill assassin Alzheimer's disease. And I had my. It's an interesting concept if you think about it.
Yeah, it'd be useful when you have to testify when you start getting charged or something criminally. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right, or you start running your mouth in the wrong places and it pisses off the wrong people.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what happens in the story. And my Vito Corleone character is named Tony Tauk, the head of the mafia of the future. Calls him in and says, "You got 3 days to get your stuff in order, and then we're going to retire you." Ostensibly meaning we're going to put you in a facility, but the character named Stax Fisher knows he doesn't mean it's a facility. He means permanent retirement. So the novel is this chase across the solar system where he's besting these younger assassins that are coming after him with old techniques and things that they would think are out of style or might not even be aware of anymore. And of course, that's a commentary on the fact that I'm over 50 now. So screw you 20-year-olds, damn it, I know better. I know better.
Yeah. Snapchat, what?
Yeah.
Assassins don't Snapchat. Why would you do that?
Right. What's that?
Kill you.
Get off
We
the
don't-
Snapchat. Yeah.
We don't have the My Page Insta Snap over here.
Right.
So I thought that was a pretty cool story. It's very much like Dashiell Hammett or Mickey Spillane, but set in a sci-fi world. It's first person. The guy's got his tongue in his cheek all the time. He's a smart ass. Anyway, so for the background for that novel, the Syndicate Corporation, which is the five families of the future from The Godfather, the Syndicate Corporation is this conglomeration of five factions. Each of them take different aspects of the corporate economy in the solar system and manage it, whether it's distribution or it's resource management or it's economic management, whatever. And I hate blacks and whites in terms of easy characters. I like gray characters.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted the corporation not to be just pure evil. And so I said, okay, it was thanks to the corporation that humanity survived the climate crisis in the next 100, 150 years. If they hadn't come along and done what the governments couldn't do, humanity would have been extinct. So I thought that brought a little gray to it, even though they're, Vito Corleone and they're, the bad guys and all that. If it hadn't been for them, we wouldn't be around. So that sort of was in the back of my mind, and developing the world behind ORP, I had developed a 10-page world document or so to sort of have in my mind when I was writing that novel. That's what I wanted to do with David, and so that's where this first trilogy comes in. It starts with the Lazarus Protocol. It sort of develops the background about how the Syndicate Corporation comes to be. And now I'm working on the second trilogy, which is really where it's fully flowered, and you get this character of Stax Fisher becomes one of the perspective characters in the novel. And anyway, that's how it all kind of came to be.
So the series that you guys are working on is a prequel to the series you already have out?
Well, no, I don't have a series out. I wrote this ORP novel, and it's still on the shelf.
Oh, that's the one on the shelf.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Corvo AZ says, thank you for adding the nuance to the corporation trope.
Oh, cool.
So they're doing more than just throwing poo in the live chat. And making lots of good things.
But it's only Corvo, though. Don't get anybody else.
Some nice compliments from a certain editor as well.
Nice.
Well, the United States.
So I wanted to develop that world, that background world, which is what David's trilogy, and I call it David's trilogy because he's done most of the writing on it. And he's really good. We're sort of genre spanning. This is a whole topic on its own. But we're sort of starting out with corporate thriller, proto sci-fi, expanse type of material, right? We're just getting into space. There are space stations. We've just gotten Mars sort of underway. It's only like 100 years in the future, something like that. And David is really, really, really good at writing political thriller stuff. And that's what this trilogy needed to be. How do these corporations come together? How do they take over the world governments? Russia, China, the United States. How do they take over the United Nations? How does that happen? How could that possibly happen? And so he was the perfect person to really take the lead on the first trilogy.
The number of times we had the conversation of, I don't know, Dave, you can't do that because it hasn't been invented yet. I'm like, dude, this is fiction. We can invent anything. It's no. It hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can do whatever we want.
Yeah.
So I ended up having a space battle with mining ships because that's what I had available.
Yeah.
Limited resources there.
Exactly.
So, man, now my follow-up question page is filled.
The cross-examination thickens.
You're welcome.
Yes. Let me
ask a 15-part question.
Yes, I'm going to ask a 15-part question while holding a phone book and shining a flashlight in your eyes. I want to cycle back to the beginning where David was talking about becoming a full-time writer. And Chris, are you a full-time writer now? Yes.
No, I still have a day job. I only write at night in the shadows.
Ah, yes, the shadow knows.
Shadow writing.
So David said he decided to be a full-time writer. I think he might have been a little tongue-in-cheek and then also a little factual because a lot of people um, decide to do it, but sometimes it's based on unforeseen circumstances, and that's kind of what I figured out of that, out of what you said. So can you dive into that a little bit and then
Yeah, sure. I had a job and I had always planned to leave it, I guess is the best way to put it. So I always had sort of, I guess you call it a fuck you fund that
yeah.
that I kept stocked throughout the years. So when I left the Navy, I went into operations in a company that was a lot like the Navy. It was a multinational industrial gas company, and I ran a nitrogen distillation plant in outside of Portland, Oregon, and hated it because it was just like the Navy. So I ended up switching to sales. And the good thing about sales is that you get these things called bonus checks, which I'm like, hey, you get your paycheck and then they send you this extra money. What is going on with that? So we lived well under our means, and I took some of that extra money and I put it aside in a separate fund, knowing that someday I was going to tap this fund, and I'd save for college education and retirement and that stuff, and then it was this other little thing on the side. So when I was in a job with a small tech company here in Minneapolis, had only been there a couple of months, and had one of those meetings with the CEO where you realize that the job you thought you took and the job you actually took are not the same job. And at the time, I think I was 47, and I'm like, and he wanted me to do something that I just was not going to do for a whole bunch of reasons. And you're sitting there and you're 47 and you're like, I've seen this movie before, and the main character dies, and I'm the main character. So we're gonna rewrite the script, and the script includes me walking out at the end of Act 1.
I was gonna say, is that when somebody mails you a phone and it goes off in the middle and you're like,
so I literally the headquarters of the company was in Jersey. I flew in on Sunday night to meet the CEO. We had a very bad meeting. I went back in the morning and we spent the whole day together, talked through the whole thing. And at the end of the day, we agreed that we were not agreeing, and I got on a plane and flew home. And I got to Newark Airport. I called my wife and I said, hey, I'm flying home. She says, it's Monday. Why would you be flying home? I said, I just resigned. She's like, oh, okay.
That's well, nice.
Come on. So I had intended to go back into the workforce, but I was going to take the summer off. My oldest had just graduated from high school. So she was off to college. So we're going to take a nice long family vacation. Things were going to be good. And then at the end of the summer, I'm like, I'm not going back. So I got out the calculator and did the math and said, okay, this is what we need to live on, and this is how much I would need to make, and this is the kind of ramp up time, and you sort of arrange things, and it was a little touch and go there for pieces, but now it works out. So yeah, it was a I did not leave and say I'm going to be a writer. I left. And by the way, I do not advise people to do it this way. I left.
Don't do this at home.
And then said, oh, I'm going to take some time off. And then I started working on a novel, and I liked it, and I self-published it. It wasn't very good, and I knew that. But I'm like, you know what? I could take that idea and I could write a series, and I could sell that series, and then I could do the next thing. And I was just having a hell of a good time. So I'm like, I'm not going back. We're going to figure out a way to make this thing work. And I have an extremely supportive wife, so that also helped.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
But it wasn't that it wasn't that you just decided, oh, I'm going to write now. Obviously, you've been doing writing and reading your whole life, and this just kind of was an opportunity for you to expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I knew from a very, very early age that I wanted to be a writer. I'd always been a huge reader. And I was one of those kids who, wrote stories and showed them to their teacher, and, up until like high school. And then I sort of stopped because life got in the way, and, went in the Navy and went into submarines and went into corporate life. And I always read. I mean, I basically read a book a week for I don't know how many years, all different kinds of stuff. And I had a couple of started novels, but, I'd get 100 pages in or whatever, and then I'd be off on a new assignment and it just fell by the wayside. I never actually, the problem for me with writing while I was working full time was the kind of jobs I had were such that I didn't have any mind share left to use on the writing. It was sort of an energy mind share thing.
Basically creatively exhausted by the time you're done with your day.
Yeah, I mean it was, and plus I traveled like a freaking madman. I mean I was in Asia probably 8 or 10 times a year. I lived in Asia for 2 years. So so like on airplanes, like on 12-hour plane flights, I'd read a couple books. I didn't watch movies. I read books. So I read a shitload of books. And then when I started writing, I mean, it's sort of all that stuff is like preparation, right? It all sort of comes together pretty quickly.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that you started going at the business aspect, and then you just kind of jumped in feet first, and were like, I'm going to make this work, and um, obviously had met different people in the industry, and kind of grew that way, kind of just organically as you went. Chris, I've seen your name associated with indie publishing, like you said, way back in the bunker heydays with Pennsylvania,
right?
And then got in with some Patrice Fitzgerald anthologies and Steve Bollier anthologies. Hey, you were in Tales of Tinfoil. I mean, that was one of the first. I think that might have been the second indie author anthology ever created. I think the first one was Tales from the Indie Side that Hugh Howey was in.
Right.
And then this Tales of Tinfoil that Gatewood put out. And that's really kind of how I knew you, was the short story guy and then the Pennsylvania Kindle Worlds guy.
Yeah, I used to hold a sign out, "We'll write for food."
But what's interesting,
write for anything.
That's right. But what's interesting to me is I've always liked your writing style, and even the short story that you wrote for Tales of the Apocalypse. I think it was Tales of the Apocalypse, the very first one.
The Unconditional, the one about the dog in the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah. Yes, I absolutely loved that story.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about how both of you guys, and obviously you've said that this is your idea and your world, and you've brought David in to write. But let's talk about kind of the generation of the idea and how you decided, hey, let's bring David in and work on this and turn it into a thing.
Well, we talked about collaborating first. In fact, we sort of collaborated. Nick Webb used to have a Kindle World when everybody used to have a Kindle World. Kindle World doesn't exist anymore, right? Called Legacy Fleet, which is sort of a Battlestar Galactica future humanity works the alien swarm, works against the alien swarm, battles them. Anyway, we decided to write books in that Kindle World, and we were like, well, let's do something together. So he wrote a book called Invincible, and I wrote a sequel to it called Avenger. And so it was sort of a duology that sort of set apart some of the Legacy Fleet world that Nick Webb had hinted at but hadn't actually developed yet. And so that worked pretty well. And so I was talking to him about, Jason Anspach and Nick Cole were putting together their Galaxy's Edge world, and Michael Anderley's doing his thing with his collaborators, and so I was like, why don't we write something together? Why don't we do something together? And so we were sort of sold on the idea of working together before we ever had an idea, and we were kind of one foot and then the other. Well, what do we want to do? What do we want to do? What do we do? And I said, well, I've got this whole world I'd like to develop behind this novel I never published. I mean, what more do you need to know? And
True.
He said, okay, yeah, I can work with that. Let's work on that. And so we kind of developed the background for that together. I mean, he's been the primary on that, and we could talk about the collaboration process and how that works and sometimes doesn't work with two authors working on the same material.
Absolutely.
But he took the lead on this because it's a lot of political thriller, kind of military thriller kind of stuff to get us to the point where then I can take over with book 4.
So with you mentioned your world build document. I've written in Nick Coles and Jason Onspach's Galaxy's Edge universe, and their world document was like 3 pages, and basically it was like it was basically this is what we've written. Now go write a badass story.
Yeah,
like,
write some
doesn't
awesome
tell me
shit.
anything. That doesn't say anything to me.
Write some awesome shit and don't do this or this.
Yeah. So I'm curious about your writing
No
document.
nether ops for you, damn it.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. He said no nether ops.
Yeah.
And in parentheses, he said you'll find out why later. And I'm like, but I want to know now. What if I want to write a nether ops?
Yeah. So now I know.
So how did you develop the document, and then how did you guys, I mean, obviously it's a collaboration, so there's going to be things that David wants to do that changes things that you already have done. So talk a little bit about that and kind of how you grew the world together.
Sure. I'll just start by saying I had put together like a 10-pager just to have background in my own head when I was writing ORP. And so I gave that to David, not necessarily as direction, but just as like, okay, this is what I've got done. And then I let him take it from there. So I'll let him speak to how he developed the pre-world.
Yeah. So I mean, this trilogy, the first book, which has been released, the Lazarus Protocol.
Great name, by the way.
Yeah. Yes.
Pretty cool.
Available now on Amazon for only 99 cents for a few more hours. Those first 3 books are really the prequel to the era of the novel that Chris has already written. So what I noticed immediately out of the world building document is that his vision for that center trilogy. So let me back up. This is envisioned as a 9-book series, 3 linked but not necessarily need to be read in order trilogies. So the first 3 books should be read in order, but you could start up on the second trilogy and you wouldn't miss anything if you hadn't read the first trilogy. So there's multiple entry points. But what I immediately noticed is that his vision for the center trilogy, which is the novel that he's working on now, plus the one that's on the shelf, was very sharp. He knew exactly what he wanted. He knew exactly what it had to be. The leading trilogy and the trailing trilogy, not so much. They were open for development. So I took that prequel trilogy and say, okay, I know where we end up. Let's talk about how we get there, right? So the Syndicate Corporation, SynCorp for short, in Chris's trilogy is a formed thing. So I went back and said, okay, let's start from, the premise of climate change has become untenable and somebody's got to do something, and let's develop the Syndicate Corporation out of that. So basically, in the Lazarus Protocol, a tech entrepreneur, an Elon Musk kind of guy, gets tapped by the president to geoengineer the Earth's atmosphere to get us out of a climate change problem, and mayhem ensues.
The mayhem ensues is the one I like. It's always the best when you're like, oh, and then nothing really happened. I'm like, oh gosh, what happened to that part?
And it worked. Everybody went home happy. So much.
I just opened up the Lazarus Protocol on KU, so it's available in KU. I take it.
Yes, it is.
Always a good thing.
Yeah, let's. I want to dive into a little bit about a little bit more about how you guys work together to write it. But first, we're going to talk about the show sponsor, which coincidentally is the Lazarus Protocol.
Oh, I can't believe it! How does this happen? That's really fortuitous.
Yeah,
such a crazy thing to happen.
I love when a marketing plan comes together.
Yeah, when the plan comes right out of my mouth. See,
so I'm putting the link in the live chat if you're watching live. And by the way, if you're not watching live, you're wrong, and you need to be watching live.
I mean, you should be ashamed of yourself, basically.
If you're not watching live, you're dead. Right?
Shaming listeners.
Right. Very true. Oh, that could be our new tag. If you're not watching live, you're dead.
You can.
I dig it. Let's do it.
And you'll get like a 0.02 cent commission every time we use the line.
Awesome. In about 10 years, I can buy a Coke.
Yeah, there you go. Which would be a good choice. I agree.
So the Lazarus Protocol, a sci-fi corporate techno thriller, the Sincor Saga Book 1, is this. I'm going to read it in my awesome, cool voice, because I already started doing it a little bit in pre-show, and so now we're going to do it for real this time. 4 lives collide as Earth stands on the brink of mass extinction. Mother Nature is mad as hell. Monster hurricanes, freak sandstorms, roasting wildfires. Species disappear every day. Is humanity next? Though some believe our future lies among the stars, the American president, funds the Lazarus Project, a last-ditch attempt to reverse Earth's climate crisis through geoengineering. But the New World Order, a mysterious league of reactionary activists with sleeper agents around the world, pursues another outcome: the subjugation of mankind to nature itself. A brilliant billionaire who wants to save the world, a lunar engineer called home to bury her father, a disgraced veteran haunted by yesterday's mistakes, a U.S. Army colonel desperate to save as many people as possible. 4 lives, 1 planet, and a chance to save them all. Actually, it's a one chance to say, one last chance to save it. But I used some creative license on that.
Right. Yeah. Artist interpretation. Always
That's right.
voice acting at finest.
That's right. Brought to you by the best-selling writing team of Bruns and Pourteau. The Lazarus Protocol is the first installment of the SynCorp Saga, a new series of dark sci-fi thrillers about the corporate takeover of our solar system. Pick up the Lazarus Protocol to discover this exciting new series today. And like David said, it's 99 cents right now, so go buy it right now.
Go buy it.
Like immediately. Like you should have already had it now because you bought it.
She should have just bought it while I was reading the description.
I did.
If you didn't, you're wrong.
Actually, I bought it slightly before that.
I'm just gonna say that's one of the best ad reads I've ever done in my life. Just FYI, one of the best.
And thanks for pointing out where I need to bridge some of those places in the sentences there. Clearly, they're too much of a tongue twister. I need to fix those.
It could also be beer or whiskey.
I was going to say it could also be slightly attributed to whiskey.
Yeah, I was going to say
there are other potential reasons why.
Yes, it might not be specifically your sentence structure. It could just be that I'm half drunk and can't read. So it could be.
Well, I want to point out something based on your read. But actually, there's one of those paragraphs that has the 4 different characters mentioned, and David can speak to this too. We did. We wrote from 4 different perspectives. So you have 4 different perspective characters that eventually come together as the story intertwines, a la The Expanse or Game of Thrones or any of those books where you have multi-characters that are expressing what's going on to the reader.
So I'm very curious about this because I've got a couple projects that are collaboration. One project specifically where we've got multiple characters that are doing a plethora of different things. But in this series, you said that David was doing a lot of the heavy lifting originally. So I kind of want to get into the process of these books and how you guys lay down the draft. So when you start out, can you kind of walk us through your guys' process and bounce it out back and forth between you guys?
I'm especially interested if there's any special breathing exercises or stretching routines that help you get the blood flowing, to the cerebral cortex.
Let me just say, David walks the dog. That's
right.
That is not a euphemism for anything. He's literally walking the dog.
Right.
I'll let him explain the process.
That's solid. Dog walking is a solid part of any writer's routine. I'm just saying. Now, take it away.
Yep.
All right.
You want to start?
Yeah, go for it.
So, so I came. So, collaborations are contact sport, right? And I firmly believe that you don't actually have a real collaboration locked in until you're about a year in. And I say that because I've been writing with another guy for 4 years. So I've gone through the process of you come to it with what you think you're good at and what you think you want to do. And then over time, you figure out where the 2 of you best fit in a complementary way. So like the other collaboration, we have a very defined process now where literally JR, we talk the story through together for probably a month or two, and we sort of talk through the broad story arc. He goes away and he produces an outline, and I mean a serious, like a couple 100-page outline with research, because it's a contemporary military thriller with research and links and pictures of characters and that kind of stuff. I do not have the patience for that, but I do all the writing, and then we edit together, and then we work through it. So when Chris and I came together, I mean, Chris is obviously a writer, right? So I mean, you got two writers, and both sort of trying to figure out what's going on. Now I came to it with the idea that I would take the lead on laying down the draft because I had more availability. And the initial plan was I would do a draft. He has an editing background. He would edit it, would both save us time and money. And then, we would produce stuff very quickly. It didn't work out like that, actually. The reason why it didn't is, well, actually a whole bunch of reasons. But part of it was everything I'd given Chris before this date had been like a multiple draft thing, or it had already been through my copy editor. He hadn't actually seen a first draft from me, which is, not that great, right? So I finished the first draft and I sent it off to him, and he calls me. He's like, "What the fuck is this, man? I mean, this is horrible."
I love that.
And I'm like, well, that's what a first draft looks like. And he says, "Dude, I'm gonna have to do some serious work on this." I'm like, "Well, hey, do what you're gonna do." So meanwhile, I had in my other writing world, the St. Martin's press book was due, and they were sort of delayed. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to jump in and write book 2 right now. So I'm cranking away on book 2. He's editing book 1. I then took a hiatus of 6 weeks to work on the St. Martin's press book. So I come back to it, and this is like, I don't know, March maybe or something. And so I first look at book 1, and I look at the rewrites, and I'm like, wow, this is not really what I planned. I think our styles are, we're not meshed yet. So we went through some, I mean, we did some serious rewriting back and forth on the first 2 books, and it ended up being a much more time-consuming process than we had thought to get to the end product. I mean, the end product is what we wanted, but the process for us to get there was very painful. You want to?
That's very.
So the takeaway.
I was going to say that's very interesting that you said that, because I'm in the middle of 2 collaborations now where the writing style is very different.
Yeah.
Between the writers, and I mean, on one half it's different here, and on the other half it's different here. So you're dealing with 3 types of writing styles that now have to kind of work together. And I mean, obviously it's taken you guys a little bit to get the drafts down. So how was it going, man? Are we talking about throwing tomahawks at each other, paper, rock, scissors? Like,
a lot of dog
exactly. No, that's exactly right. No, I mean, I think we both were pretty. We wanted this collaboration to work. First of all, we're friends. Second of all, we want this business to work.
Yeah.
So he would take my rewrites and cut what he didn't like, keep what he did like, and that was a very painful process for him. I mean, he would like, I didn't sleep at all last night, man. I really don't want to cut this stuff, but I've got to make this chapter. I was like, dude, make it better. I don't care whether you cut my stuff or not. Just make it better. But
I was in knots. I mean, that was horrible. I mean, because I mean, I knew how hard he had worked on it.
Right.
So to go and hack on, I mean, I know what I'm like when people do it to me. So I should preface this, right? So when we came into this, Chris is like, look, I have an editing background. I can do the editing. And I said, look, I don't have an editing background, and I don't want to have an editing background. I will not edit your stuff. I'll read it. I'll give you comments, but I'm not going to edit it because I can't. I have never met a paragraph I didn't want to rewrite. Honest to God. Hasn't happened yet. And then I'm doing it to him, and I'm like, oh my God, you'd be peeling me off the ceiling if it was my book. Oh, anyway, sorry.
No, that's all right. So
That's good.
But for me, I have no problem rewriting because I've been an editor for 25 years. So I'm like, yep, needs to be fixed. Nope, that's not right. So I don't have that compunction at all. But the first book wasn't so bad in the sense that my rewrites, he cut some stuff, but he liked what I did with a couple of the main characters, and so that was fine. And I got it, I think, at a later developmental stage than a first draft. I think it was a refined I think he thought it was basically done. I enhanced it, changed it a little bit. He cut a little bit, and then we were done. The second book, Cassandra's War, he gave me as a literal first draft. And that's where we had the "what the hell is this, man" conversation.
What are you doing to me?
What are you doing to me? And I thought, well, for me, I don't give anybody a draft that I haven't been through and like done a dramatic reading and all this stuff. And so I'm like, well, I guess this is what he thinks is the final product. I'm just gonna, and so I rewrote it from page 1 to page 200 and whatever. I just rewrote it. And handed it back to him, and he was like,
yeah.
So what we learned on those first 2 books, remember I was talking about the Legacy Fleet collaboration, where what he did was he drafted an outline. I gave him some feedback. I read the first draft of the novel. He refined it. He published. I did an outline. He gave me feedback. I wrote the first draft of the novel. He gave me feedback. I published. That's going to be our new. We should have stuck with what we knew is the upshot of that, because we tried to literally write together, and it was just too painful. And it took us a year to produce 2 books that should have taken 6 months.
Yeah.
So
it's really a hard learning curve.
Yeah.
But by the same token, we had to try it, right?
Yeah.
Because it made perfect sense on the face of it. He's got an editing background. I had more time, or I had time on the front end of the schedule, so it made perfect sense. The problem is it didn't work.
Right.
Well, you don't learn anything unless you take this type. You got to take some risks and things like that creatively and in your production schedule. Otherwise, you're not going to make any progress. So I think that was smart.
One of the questions we had, probably came in about 5-10 minutes ago, when we were talking about the World Bible, and then kind of Chris, having developed a series and then bringing David in, consistently, Christie, backed by James McCormick, asks, how do you handle IP with a collaborative co-author deal? And I think I know what the answer is going to be, but talk about how you guys have gone about it.
Okay, so David can probably speak to the business side better than I can, but just very briefly, we decided to do 50-50 split. And we're branding the books. So you'll see on the cover there, Bruns and Pourteau.
Yeah.
We're going to brand all the books that way so that they have a unique but consistent look and feel. We're splitting the IP 50-50 for any SynCorp Saga books.
For the inevitable movie deal.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm thinking Amazon series myself, but okay. I'll settle for the movie. It's fine.
He says he'll settle for the movie. Listen to this guy.
Yeah.
Or maybe a video game.
There you go. Now that's a good idea.
How do you make the real money?
Yeah. So we split that 50-50, and I'm publishing them through Hit Phoenix Publishing LLC, which is an LLC I created. And basically, Amazon will pay the LLC, and I will pay David out of post-profit or profit proceeds, and give him a 1099 at the end of the year. That's how that's going to work.
Yep, that's good.
That's actually good to know, because we're doing an anthology here next year, and then talking about doing a couple collaborations for the next couple of years. So it's always good to hear how other people are doing and working the business aspect of their collaborations. When you say you're splitting 50-50, is it a true 50-50 where you're both splitting the cost of the editing and the marketing and the cover? I mean, you give great Tom Edwards covers, by the way. Are those all expenses that you both are sharing, and then just going forward splitting the 50-50? How does that work?
Well, the covers actually are by Adam Hall, that you see out there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did the Tales of the Apocalypse and Tales of Dystopia covers. So you may.
Oh, okay.
Also
wow.
great covers.
But
Very cool.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, we agonized over those too, man. We agonized over every aspect of these books. But it was a hard birth, I'll tell you. So what we're doing depends on how much input. So for each of the first two books, because they were so painful, we're splitting them 50-50. Right. The third book, I forget what we settled on, but it's probably going to be like 80-20 or 80-20, I think is what we talked about, or 90-10 or something. Because I gave him an outline for book 3, which he then took and molded and changed and evolved, and then wrote the book. So yes, I have some input in the book, but he did the lion's share of that. So that's going to be an 80-20. It'll probably be the same thing for my trilogy. I'm sure he's going to give me feedback on the book and, make it better for me. And so it'll probably be an 80 me, 20 him split on those books. So it's just sort of a common sense approach. And the other thing I wanted to mention on that topic of common sense, David, I don't know the book. You may remember the book, but David sent me sort of 20 or 30 points that collaborators should clarify before they go down the business road. And so besides the 50-50 split thing and the Hit Phoenix thing and all that, we wrote up a document that we both signed that said, look, this is how we're going to behave. We're not going to walk away. We'll give each other the opportunity to buy each other out. If somebody dies, this is what happens, So it was covering all those necessary might ifs kind of things that might happen. So I thought that was very wise on his part to put that forward, and we refined it and signed it. And I think that's a very good document for everybody that's going to do this to have.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree, because you go into it, I don't know that I've experienced this or seen this firsthand, but you hear, horror stories of people going into these partnerships and thinking, the friendship will hold it together, and then it doesn't.
No,
when the money when the money starts rolling in, or when the money doesn't start rolling in, but the bills are coming in, then you start seeing a lot of going at each other's throats because there wasn't a plan ahead of time. It definitely a way to ruin a friendship for sure. One of this line of questioning while we're on this topic consistently, Christy follows up her original question with, so can you both write in the world without each other, or in the world are you collaborating all the time on the series, and can you go back by yourselves and write individual books in it, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, in fact, the agreement that we signed, the core 9 novels are going to be branded Bruns and Pourteau, and I assume any offshoots would be the same way. I don't know that we've actually discussed that. But in any case, David can go write a book. The most popular character in the first couple of books from beta readers has been Ming Chen Lao, who is a lunar engineer. And he's already said, I bet you she's going to have her own book. Somewhere there's going to be a Ming book. So if he wants to go off and write that, have at it.
Yeah, so we did cover that. I don't remember exactly what we said. I think so we both jointly own the IP, so we have the ability to exercise the IP for a separate project. I don't remember whether we said it had to still be branded under the co-branded name, which would make perfect sense. Even if the other person, so for example, Chris already has a novel on the shelf, ORP. Eventually that'll be released, and I mean he'll get all or substantially all of the revenue from that because he wrote it, right? So the other thing that the agreement, which I think I got it out of as he was talking, I think I got it out of Helen Sedgwick's indie business or indie author business book, I think it is. And she had like a checklist at the back. But the other thing we did was we established up front who had editorial control of a book. So you get to a point where you're at loggerheads about whether a character dies or not, right? Somebody's got to make that call.
I would never have thought about something like that ever.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, it's. I mean, that actually came directly out of my other collaboration experience, because I knew that you get to things, and my other partner and I are also great friends, but I mean, sometimes you see things differently, or sometimes you want to keep a character in, you want to knock a character off, whatever. And somebody has to be able to make that call, because when there's two people, you can't outvote each other.
Right.
So how did you decide on who gets the final call? Who gets the final call in the
Who's the executioner?
Right.
Yeah, it's whoever writes the first draft, basically.
Yeah. So
okay.
That makes
has the
sense.
final call on the first trilogy. I've got the final call on the second trilogy, and if we get to the third trilogy, we'll figure that out.
Yeah. So up front, we decide who has editorial control, who's gonna write the first draft, what's the royalty split going to be. There's other things, but they're escaping me at the moment. But basically, trying to head off. If you get to a point where you're not seeing eye to eye, you've got to have something to fall back on. So like if I'm trying to think of something that we weren't agreeing on, and sometimes you're just like, what, I got the last one, you get this one, because it really, really matters to you, and it doesn't matter as much to me, or vice versa.
Yeah, I think that the upshot of all that is try not to be a dick, and try to be open-minded. This is your partner here. This isn't just somebody that's kicking you in the shins. It's somebody that has as much invested in the work as you do. So give them their due, and then try to come to some decision that benefits the project or benefits the book, not the ego of one of the other people.
For the fans and the readers, that's the big thing. Reader expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
Another interesting question I had was, I'm kind of in your position, Chris, where as collaborative speaking, you have let's just say the meat of the idea. You had the seed, you had the universe, all that, and you bring David into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you guys outline the books together, you plan the books together, and now I'm a damn near 3 books into this trilogy. Is this trilogy what you envisioned it to be when you first started out with this idea, or
that's a great question? I want to hear the answer to that one.
Has David just come in and just said, to hell with your shit, I'm doing what I want to do?
No, there's an easy answer to that. I had no vision other than this group of companies comes together, forms the Syndicate Corporation, and saves mankind when the environment threatens to kill off humanity. That's all I knew. So he had a whole palette to paint on,
Yeah.
Yeah, but so and I think I said this earlier, is that what I saw right away was Chris's vision around the center part, around that center trilogy, was very sharp. He had the tone down, he had sort of the world down, he had how it worked. The corporation does this, the corporation does that. The trilogies on either side were less formed. Yeah. So taking that first trilogy, I knew where we wanted to end up. Literally, we knew what the last scene of the third book was going to be from like the first meeting, because it sets up the next trilogy, and it's sort of a generational handover. So yeah, it was. I think the canvas was actually pretty clear, apart from certain things where he's like, no, you can't use that. They haven't been invited. Haven't been invented yet.
Yeah, you can't have fighters. You can't have fighters. No fighters.
Can't have space fighters yet. Haven't been invented yet. All right, fine. I'll use mining ships.
There you go.
That's like one of those video games that's really strict rules, and you're trying to build it up, and you're like, I wish I could just have fighters right now, but I haven't unlocked that level or whatever.
I know that we're coming to the end of the hour, but I've several questions. So if you guys have to go, just hit hang up and you can go.
Just flip the bird first, and then screw you guys. I'm out. I gotta do shit.
I'm out.
As long as my dogs that I haven't been paying attention to or allow me, I'll stay as long as you like.
One of the questions I had was that through the writing of the books, and David, you're a full-time author, as you've said, and you've have another collaboration. And Chris, you said that you're writing is a full-time job. I don't know that I would say as a part-time job, but you still have another day job on top of it.
Right.
So when you talk about the writing and David doing the majority of the writing for the series, when you go on to the other series, is it still going to be the same where you guys are outlining the same and David is doing the majority of the writing, or what is your vision for that as you press forward through this?
Well, for the second trilogy, so far I'm about halfway through book 4, or book 1 of the second trilogy, and I'm pretty much writing it on my own, and then I'm going to hand it to David and say, okay, tell me what's wrong with it. And I'm probably going to do that for the entire trilogy.
And so when you guys collaborate, it's more of for instance, one of the collaborations I have is I get an outline and then I write it and then he edits. And then the other collaboration I have, we basically chose 2 characters each, and then we're writing both. I'm writing 2 characters and the other writer's writing 2 characters. And then we're going to go back and make sure the voices match and the narrative matches after the fact. But basically what you guys are doing is David writes a book, Chris edits and sends it back. Chris writes a book, David edits and sends it back. Is that kind of what I'm?
Well, what we learned is Chris shouldn't edit what David writes.
David's already said David is not going to edit what.
Yeah, David doesn't want to.
What Chris writes, yeah.
Yeah, so I think what we use each other for, I think what we learned on the Legacy Fleet thing, and we've come back around to, is that we really trust each other's gut check ability. We respect each other's writing talent. We respect each other's ability to be frank and honest and upfront. And so we just use each other as sort of a gut check. Josh, you were saying that you're writing 2 characters and the other person is writing 2 characters. Y'all must have a very tight outline to make all those things work together, right?
Yeah. Josh is an outliner.
And the crazy thing about that series is that we haven't actually started writing. We've been planning and talking about it for months. And we're not going to start writing probably until middle of 2019, which is where the schedule aligns for both of us to write it. But
I really like the idea of that long-term project, that type of deep investment you guys are putting into that. So.
Yeah, and the characters that we're writing, it's my world that I envisioned, but I presented him like basically here's the characters that I had in mind for this series. And he said, oh, I like this one. I don't like that one. And I don't like that one. Maybe we should do this with that one. And I said, that's awesome. Let's do that. And so now we're just going through and kind of taking the entire story arc and fitting the character plot arcs in such a way that they all make sense in the overall scheme of things. And then I will write mine and he will write into and kind of edit, and then he will write his and I will write into and edit, and then I have the final overall voice. And so when I go back on the whole thing, I'm going to make sure that they all sound basically the same. So it's kind of like the Expanse series where Daniel Abrams wrote one character and then the other guy. God, I can't think of his name.
Ty, what the heck is his name? Anyway.
Yeah, that guy.
If only there was a way we could look this up.
Yeah. I had the internet right in front of myself. But that's the way they did theirs, and I think it worked out pretty well for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't. So your outline must be incredibly detailed.
So yeah, when I outline, I pretty much I mean, it's basically a first draft. My outlines are first drafts because I outline what people say, what the end of the scene is going to be, where they're at, what they smell. All my outlines are ridiculous.
My outline says space battle here.
Yeah, I mean,
characters go to Travalen.
Yeah, mine might have a paragraph about what's going to happen in the scene. But what the thing that I like the most is starting a scene with I know I need to get to here, or this has to happen in the scene, and then having it develop on the page. And and so my outline, what happens, I know the high points, but I find a lot of joy in manipulating a lot of the innards, right. and in that writing process, and that actually makes it quite difficult because I'll say, oh well, this is cool, let's do that, but then this other thing has to change, right? So you end up with a lot of serendipitous stuff that I know I'm going to have to change, and that's fine. But I always force myself to have an outline so it's logical, and so the story arc is there. But I take a lot of joy in discovering other ways it could happen that are better than the first level idea I had.
That's one of the things that David and I share, I think, and one of the things that we like about each other's writing is that we both write very character-driven narratives. Yeah. So, and that's what I think that's kind of what he's talking about is, so the person walks in the room and they sit down at the table, that's what the outline says. But what is the atmosphere like? Where did they just come from? Are they upset? Do they order 6 drinks in a row? And out of that behavior, do they host a podcast and drink whiskey too much? Out of that behavior.
Whoa.
It happened.
That was a little close to home. But what does that behavior create in the scene that then elicits the next feeling or response out of that character?
I would really love to get my hands on your guys' outline and how you
should do an outline show. We can all like put forth part of our sample outlines.
No, I'm dead serious.
Cool. We did that one episode where we whiteboarded that.
Exactly.
It was a blast. It was really cool.
I learned so much from watching people, not just talking about it, but actually watching people go through the creative process. Like when Scott and I, we whiteboarded one of his novellas for his Dark Landing series, and it was so cool just to sit there and kind of for an hour we whiteboarded this.
And that's one of the best ones in the series. And it was super easy to write. It just really took off.
It just flowed. Yeah,
a lot of depth to it.
So I really like hearing how people just go through from beginning to end, and kind of my outlines are really like first drafts where I do all my discovery writing in my outline. I do like 90% of my discovery writing in my outline, and then as I'm going back and flushing it out, I have 10% where I'm like, I could do this or I could do that, and it still gives me that kind of I'm not just copying down words as I'm writing, but it helps me out a lot as I sit down and actually do write, and I'm not sitting down and going, what am I going to write today? I have no idea because I don't have anything in front of me to write, and that's the hardest part about writing for me.
Yeah, I mean that's really where a partner can come in and really help. I wrote an outline for book 3 that has just gone to the editor. And then we went out and spent, my wife and I met David and his wife in person for the first time at 20 Books to 50K last year.
Yeah.
And Christine and Allison, my wife, and his wife Christine hit it off really well. And so we ended up going up for like 5 days this summer and spending some time in cool Minnesota outside of sweltering Texas, where we live. And I took the outline up there, and then he and I went to the local library and used the whiteboard and started, changing things around and moving characters around and what's the motivation and how do they get over there? Wait a minute. And so the power of a partner is they can look at something that you've thought was just fine because it came out of half of it came out of your brain. The other half is probably still up there.
Yeah. Right.
And they can look at it on the page and say, what the hell is that? That doesn't make any sense at all. He was just on Mars. Why is he on Jupiter now? Oh yeah, you're right.
Oops.
Fresh eyes, right? So
My bad.
That's the power of a partner there.
Yeah, I that's what I absolutely love about collaborating and co-writing is that you have a lot of what I see happen in beginning authors, and myself included, is you write. In your head, you have 100% of the story.
Yeah.
But on the paper, you only get 10% of that. And so when a reader goes through and reads it, you're like, I don't know what you're saying here. And you're like, it's absolutely, this is what he's doing. But you're not putting down 100% of what he's doing. You're only putting down 10% of what he's doing, because you're like, it's obvious that he's doing the rest of the 90%, but nobody else gets that,
right?
Because they aren't in your head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's very cool.
Read what I'm trying to say, not what I actually wrote.
And so it gets harder when you do an Expanse or a Game of Thrones type book where you have, 4 main characters, because you have to tell 4 story arcs, and you have to give them each enough screen time to make the main characters and tell that story and make the stories mesh. So I mean, a single point of view character is so much, a single point of view story rather is so much easier to write. And we knew that going in, but I don't think we fully appreciated it until we got knee deep in it. And we're like, wow, because you realize okay, I missed this part of this character's arc, 3/4 of the way. So we got to go back and fix that. It's almost, I almost got to the point on the 3rd book where I was going to write each character separately. And I literally write chapter 1 to chapter 30, whatever. And I was considering breaking that up on this book, which I didn't do, but just because you want to get the story arc consistently.
That's what I've done on my collaboration with Richard Fox, and that's how he writes all of his novels. Is he'll do, he divides his books by character group arc. I mean, you can call it character arc, but obviously there's more people than just the main character in that arc. But he'll do it if he has 3, in my case 4 separate arcs that you're going to splice in later. He'll write the beginning to the end of that arc and then move to the next one, and then go back after and put them together, which has pluses and minuses.
There's a book called Blueprinting the Bestseller, and it talks about taking all of your scenes after you write your book. You go through and you identify all your scenes from memory without looking at any of your work, and any of the scenes that you forgot, you cut.
That's not a bad idea.
And it's really brutal. And I tried it a couple of times. It's like kind of painful. It's like shooting yourself. But it has an interesting thing. But then you take and then you arrange those in the proper order. Then you, of course, fix stuff and things. But basically, the idea is that if you don't remember it, then it must not have been that important.
So an exercise, since we're talking about exercises, something I'm going to do on this 4th book that I'm writing, it's called Valhalla Station. And it's got 4 perspective characters again. So I'm writing it front to back. I've outlined it. I'm outlining it sort of 5 chapters ahead, and then I'll write those 5 chapters and I'll outline next. And so I'm writing it front to back, chapter 1 to chapter 30. But I think when I go back and rewrite, I'm going to pull all of this character's chapters together and rewrite them all at the same time to achieve some character coherence, some consistency, and then go to the 2nd character and 3rd. I think that'll be an interesting exercise. It's sort of what David said, except it's not writing them as blocks; it's rewriting them as blocks. So we'll see.
I encourage everybody to try to write a novel like that, because it forces you to kind of, like for me, you've got to think about time, and you've got to think about, I'm writing this plot arc, but if you skip 3 days in the plot arc and then you go back and try to slot it back in, you've got to think about structurally wise how your novel and how your series is going to work structurally. Because that's one of the major things I had is like, I have 8 scenes that are just run and gun, bam, 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 bam. But then in this other arc, I have 5 scenes that are a couple days apart here and a couple days apart here. And how am I going to slot those into each other to that took a lot of work. It took a lot of work to make that happen.
Making those different arcs mesh without making it kitschy. Well, then they all got on the bus together, and it's very hard. It's very challenging to do.
And that's ultimately why I didn't break the characters apart and write them separately, because I didn't want to mess up the timeline.
That's the same reason I don't do it. I find it very difficult to do that. I lose consistency with the story unless I do the whole story as the story.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Just personally. Some people do really good. Now, I do write the character arcs because I have a collaborator that does it that way, and there are advantages to that. But I couldn't do it by myself. I needed somebody to help me to do it that way. I think because I can rely on my collaborator in that instance to then put that stuff back together. Whereas if I had to do it, I'm sure I would jack that all up.
But I'll challenge you, if you're doing multi-perspective narratives, try my exercise of editing the 8 chapters that are character A after you've written the whole thing, because then you don't have to worry about the timeline. You already got that straight, right?
Oh yeah.
So then you can just focus on each character as you rewrite.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, I think we've got a couple of episode ideas now. Moving forward, is we're gonna have some collaboration and planning episodes. I think if we can get some people to sign up for them. Spoilers ahead, because I think that's a really cool part of the process that a lot of people kind of glance over. Is the a lot collaboration. I think is I'm not going to say it's the way of the future, but there's so many people doing it now. There's so many great ways to do it. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Even, I mean, like my collaborator for the fantasy series, he doesn't like writing by himself. He absolutely hates writing by himself. And I don't know how many writers are out there that are like that, but I'm sure if there's one, there's got to be 100. And so collaboration going forward, I think you're going to see a lot of it. And it'll be one of those interesting things where you're on the forefront and you can get in the middle of it and dive deep and know what you're doing when you get into it. I think it's going to be great. I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah, that and part of the reason why it works for me is because I mean, this is inherently, excuse me, a lonelier business, but you get to points where you don't know what to do, and it's invaluable to be able to call someone who knows what you're working on down to the finest detail and be able to talk to them about it. And that sort of usually breaks things free, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely it does. Well, we kind of went kind of late on this episode, and I do not apologize for that at all, because it was a really fun episode, and I'm really glad that you guys were able to knock some time out of your Monday. And Chris, thanks for taking out of your writing time to come hang out with us.
Hey, no problem.
It's a great topic. It's a great topic. Yeah, we can do that. We could probably talk about it even more, you know, because a lot of people have a lot of questions, and it always comes up every place we go. You know, at the conference, at 20 Books, they talked about it a lot, and on our shows, people are like, "Well, what do you do? How do you do a collaboration?" You know, so there's lots, 1,000 ways to do it.
Well, I will say this last advice about collaborating: treat it like a significant relationship or a marriage, because you're really two partners. Equal partners, and you know, somebody's going to piss somebody off on day 1, somebody's going to piss somebody else off on day 30. You just got to work through it and make the work and what you're doing for the reader the most important thing.
Are you going to tell them about Freak Out Friday?
Oh, you tell them about Freak Out Friday. This is a good place to hear.
I love Freak Out Friday. I'm excited to hear the story.
There was probably a 2 to 3 month period. Actually, it was when I was deep into reworking book 2. And you know, things were rocky. So one of us, almost invariably, on a Friday, would call the other one up and be like, "Oh my God, this is never going to work. This is going to, you know, break us. Whatever, you know, whatever the minuscule problem of the day was." And the other one would say, "Hey, no, it's going to be okay, man. Just go walk the dog, or you know, take a jog around the block or something, and it's all going to work out." And it almost always happened on a Friday over like a 2-month period. And some weeks it was me, some weeks it was him. But the other one was always there to say, no, it's going to be okay. Take a deep breath. Take a deep cleansing breath.
It's just Freak Out Friday.
That's right.
Friday.
I think we should brand that. Let's have a Freak Out Friday.
Everybody freak out.
Well, Chris, David, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to come out and hang out with us on this Monday night. Do you guys both have websites that we can steer viewers and listeners to?
We do. Mine is chrispourteau.com, and I'll spell it for you. It's CHRISPOURTEAU.com.
And I am davidbruns.com. David spelled like normal David, and Bruns, BRUNS, not Burns, Bruns. If you spell Burns, you're going to get somebody else.
So
MASH.
here's a funny capstone to this
Does that thing
episode.
with coyotes?
No, but I spent like 5 minutes making sure that I spelled Bruns correctly. Completely misspelled Pourteau the whole episode.
It's okay. It's okay. Everybody does, man.
Well, I'm gonna have to fix that. We cannot let that stand, and I will fix it.
Thank you.
Everybody that joined us in the live chat, thank you guys for coming and hanging out and supplying us with questions and shenanigans as always in the live chat. If you are listening on the podcast feed or just watching on YouTube later, the live chat is actually where all the magic happens in the show. You get about 10% good information from the actual podcast. You get 90% action from the live chat. So
they were greatly distracting this time. They were going on some crazy tangents from what you guys were saying. So, but lots of fun. Lots of good questions from the live chat too. So,
next week we have Josh Parrott on the show, or Perot. I don't know how you pronounce it, but I'm going to say Parrott.
Right, I'm going to champion him. Spell his name right, would you?
Spell his name right, absolutely.
Yeah, come on.
And then in just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 short weeks, we will be in Vegas for
getting tattoos.
That's right. I'm getting a tattoo. Ellen's getting a tattoo. Everyone's getting a tattoo.
I'll get a tattoo.
And we're all going to be hanging out. On the 6th of November is the KSM dinner. Everybody that has RSVP'd for that is going to be pleasantly surprised and entertained. We may be doing some giveaways, and it's going to be a great time. David, I'm sad you're not going. I'm very, very sad.
Yeah, I feel like I should reconsider now.
Yeah.
You should reconsider on the fact that we're having a dinner. That just it. Don't forget about the conference. We're doing a KSM dinner.
Exactly.
I've been looking forward to this since we left Vegas last
year.
Yeah,
all I gotta say is
when
we get there, we are not driving through the ghetto the next time we land. The last time we were in Vegas, we got in a cab. The cab driver was driving down the road. He was like, traffic sucks, I'm gonna take a shortcut. He took a shortcut.
Yeah, it was like being a worker.
We started looking at each other. We should not have gotten in this cab at all.
Yeah.
But everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with us. Come back next week. We're going to talk about some writing. We're going to talk about some reading, and of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. You guys have a fantastic Monday. Bye.
Good night. Good night.